Every 3 days, a woman is killed in the UK. These women could be sisters, daughters, neighbours, colleagues, friends. Many women do make it back home to their families, but for that small percent, something has gone terribly wrong. A younger sister is reported missing.
Her mother said that every night at that time, she thinks of her daughter and just thinks, Sarah, run, get away from him, get away from that car.
A teacher has vanished.
Getting that phone call saying that she's not here anymore just was like the worst case, like a bad dream. How could he do that? How could he hurt my sister? My whole world just crumbled down.
An only child hasn't made it home from their night out.
You know, she was encouraged by all of us to pursue her dreams, and at 5 years old, she said, I want to be a lawyer. I don't feel sorry for us, even though we have this huge gap in our lives, this huge hole, and our lives will never be the same. I feel sorry that she lost the rest of her life.
Although there is a lead that breaks open the case, what comes in light of the investigation is one that leaves an everlasting scar on the families. What began as a missing persons case would soon become one of the most tragic criminal cases in recent memory. It would lead to widespread outrage, protests and criticism of the police. Sarah Everard, a 33-year-old marketing executive, had her whole life ahead of her. She had just been promoted and was in a long-term relationship. She had a loving family and was the youngest of her 2 siblings. On a normal Wednesday evening, Sarah enjoyed a meal with a friend. She was seen on CCTV around 6 p.m. at a local supermarket, picking up a bottle of wine. On the way back home, she was seen to be in good spirits, chatting on the phone to her boyfriend.
That phone call is quite indicative of, I think, something that really resonated with women, because we all do these things to kind of keep ourselves safe when we walk home or when we're walking around the streets of London or wherever we might live at night. You know, we phone somebody, don't we, as a sort of security thing, or we carry our keys in the palm of our hand, we wear flat shoes, we wear trainers, as Sarah was that night. And it's the sort of thing any of us might do, call our boyfriend, call our husband, call our mum, call our friend, text somebody to let them know we get home safe. But of course, Sarah couldn't do that, and in fact, the phone call went dead, and we don't know whether her phone battery ran out or whether her phone was switched off. But that call was ended, and Josh was the last person to speak to her.
It was around 9 p.m. that the 33-year-old was kidnapped in South London. She was walking home to the Brixton Hill area from a friend's house near Clapham Common. This kidnapper was a Metropolitan Police officer by the name of Wayne Cousins. He used his warrant card and handcuffs to lure the victim into the back of his hired car.
We know very clearly that he wanted to find a woman on her own that night. He hired a car expressly for that purpose. And the details about that car tell us a story in themselves, because he went to Enterprise in Dover and he chose a white Vauxhall. And that is a model and a colour of that car that's frequently used by undercover police officers. So he knew he'd be able to pass it off, potentially, if he needed to. In fact, he told colleagues that he'd done this because his own car wasn't working properly, something that was later proven to be false. So he was thinking about what he would do, how he would defend himself, perhaps the excuses he would make.
At the time, restrictions were in place due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. England was in the midst of a Tier 3 lockdown, and it was advised to stay at home. People were only allowed to form support bubbles if eligible, and only a few gatherings were allowed, such as for religious services and small weddings.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home. Because the critical thing we must do to stop the disease spreading between households.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister announced the most radical steps yet to slow the spread of this virus. And these steps are not requests, they are rules.
Cousins had previously made COVID patrols and knew exactly what to say to Sarah.
She was just doing what she believed a police officer was telling her to do. So once he had her in the car, I think he then had to start thinking about what he was going to do, because it's a bit like a dog that chases a squirrel and the squirrel runs away and the dog kind of goes off. One day the squirrel just kind of goes, okay then, what are you going to do? And often the dog will go, oh right, I don't know what to do now, because the thrill was in the chase. And Cousins was the same, right, I've got you in the back of the car now, this is quite thrilling, I quite like this, what am I going to do? So he would have had to have been thinking at 100 miles an hour, and of course you would have had Sarah in the back of his car going, well, where are we going and what have I done, and all these questions.
Sarah was falsely arrested and was put in the back of what looked like an undercover police car, thinking she'd be taken to a nearby police station for breaching COVID rules. What she thought was nothing of the truth. Cousins drove her 80 miles south to his home in Kent.
She was handcuffed. She was with a stranger. She must have felt absolutely terrified. There must have been this dawning horror that Cousins was either not who he'd said he was or had staged a false arrest. I mean, goodness knows what was going through her mind. And actually, some of the words spoken by her mother in her victim impact statement in court, her mother said that every night at that time, she thinks of her daughter and just thinks, Sarah, run, get away from him, get away from that car. She has that conversation with her daughter every single night. It's just agonising. And to imagine that your loved one, your friend, even for women who felt empathy with Sarah and who think of her regularly still, to imagine her going through that process and the fear she must have felt is just absolutely heartbreaking.
What would happen after would be nothing short of a nightmare. He forced her from his hired car into his own car, raped and strangled her with his police belt, and disposed of her remains in a nearby pond. What became alarming was the revelation in which Cousins had been planning this act for a while in the days leading up to Everard's murder. He was caught on camera multiple times in local stores, purchasing all the items needed.
And then, of course, there's the CCTV footage that shows us very clearly that Cousins was premeditating this, and he is captured before Sarah's kidnap and murder and afterwards, visiting DIY shops, buying rubble sacks, buying petrol, buying adhesive, hair bands. The list goes on, the horrific list goes on.
In the days after the murder, Cousins told senior officers that he was suffering from stress and no longer wanted to carry a gun. He bought and filled a petrol container at a service station in Whitfield on the 5th of March. His car was then captured on CCTV at 12:37, driving to Hodes Wood, where he burned Everard's body inside a refrigerator. At 13:47, he bought 2 large builder's bags from B&Q, where he used one of the bags to dispose of Everard's remains. On the 8th of March, he reported himself ill from work, handing in his equipment, including his police belt and handcuffs.
Wayne Couzens would have compartmentalised his life. So down in Deal, where his home life was, his wife, his children, his pets, that would have been one section of his life. And it's interesting that geographically, from where he worked to where he lived, is a good dozens and dozens of miles away. So as he's driving home from work, that's almost like his change of character, his change of personality. I'm now back to being Mr. Couzens, husband and good dad. And when he drives to work, he's then changing into the character of, right, I'm now being this police officer. And what came with that, the advantages that came with that. We make the analogy of the thrill as being on a roller coaster. And it's interesting, in most roller coasters, the biggest drop is the first drop, isn't it? Because our adrenaline as we're going up that roller coaster is getting higher and higher and higher, and then we suddenly drop. And that drop is what people like. And it's interesting, when I work with a lot of people that come to see me for anxiety issues, one of the things that I will say to people is, you know, say for instance, say somebody will check 20 times that they've turned the oven off and they've locked the door and they've done light switches and things. And I will say, okay, so your anxiety is rising higher and higher and higher. And then when you check and it's turned off and it's locked, what happens? And they say, oh, but my anxiety drops. And people get actually addicted to that. They like that. They like that drop. And he's always looking for that first big drop.
I think one of the things that a lot of people really struggled with was how seemingly easy it was for Wayne Couzens to return to his so-called normal life in the wake of kidnapping, raping and murdering Sarah. He took his kids out to play. He phoned the vet to talk about the family dog and to seek advice on it having separation anxiety, something any of us might do. He was caught on CCTV going to a petrol station, buying a coffee, buying a Bakewell tart, you know, everyday activities. And of course, those everyday activities take on a really sinister undertone when you know the horrific crime he's just committed.
But that's exactly it. He was seen multiple times, on CCTV. As an officer of over 10 years, this is the one thing Couzens didn't think very much about.
While the police had hundreds of hours of footage to work through of Sarah's last movements and her journey home, it took a few days for the footage from the dash camera of a London bus to come in. And it was this that was to prove crucial in identifying Wayne Couzens, because it picked up the white Vauxhall that he had hired from Enterprise in Dover, and it also picked up the number plate of that car. And that led the police directly to him because he had paid for that car using his own credit card. And that meant that the search turned from South London, where Sarah had been last seen, to Kent, where Couzens lived, and to areas known to be associated with him. And it was then discovered he actually owned some woodland in the area, close to where Sarah's body was ultimately found.
One could argue that Couzens' status as a Metropolitan Police officer gave him a sense of power and control like no other, ultimately feeling unstoppable. Cameras to Couzens almost seemed like they didn't exist. As he was a police officer, there was no way he could be targeted, or so he thought. On the 9th of March 2021, Couzens was arrested in his home in Deal on suspicion of kidnapping. When first questioned if he knew of Sarah, he responded no. Only a few moments later, his body language became very telling. Couzens started to put the blame on anyone but himself, trying to deviate from what he had done to Sarah. He was arrested on suspicion of kidnap.
So the video of him being initially arrested and questioned about Sarah, it's very interesting because to begin with, he's obviously processing what's going on, and then he starts fishing for information. What do you know that then I can then defend, or how much do you know? And I thought the police officers that were interviewing were very good. They kept to the point, they kept coming back to the point that they wanted to know. They kept obviously trying to appeal to him to say, her family, her friends, her boyfriend, they're all really, really worried. That's all we want to know is where she is, can we find her, is she safe? So they kept trying to appeal to him. But his type of character, that it has low emotional intelligence, isn't going to pick up on that, isn't going to be interested. But also, his brain would have been whirring away at that moment. What do they know? How can I get out of this? So his body language is, it's interesting because he's kind of sitting back on his couch and he's got his handcuffs on, and he mentions the fact I'm handcuffed, and there's this indignation to it. He has to admit slowly that yes, he knows of the case because I've seen it on the news, but once he realises that there's lots of evidence pointing just directly to him and nobody else, he starts coming up with this ridiculous story of human trafficking and puts himself then in a situation of being the saviour. I had to save my family. They were under threat from this so-called gang that didn't exist. He kept saying that, and he said that over and over again, as if that justified his actions.
There was a white Sprinter van. They was between sort of Lenham, Maidstone area that I dropped her off. I still don't know. I don't know. They just I just parked my car up, and then the van come up behind me, flashed me, and they all jumped out.
On March the 10th, Everard's remains were discovered. Cousins was arrested again, this time on suspicion of murder.
One of the most alarming details, I think, that emerged in the days after Wayne Couzens was arrested and identified as a Metropolitan Police officer was that his nickname when he had volunteered with Kent Police had been the Rapist. And this is just unbelievable to me, that a nickname like that wouldn't have been interrogated by senior officers, wouldn't have been picked up by the Met when he went on to join them. He was given that nickname because he was known to harass women, because his female colleagues were uncomfortable with his behaviour, and because he had an extreme pornography habit. These are not the sort of people we want in our police forces. And it's absolutely shocking that somebody like Couzens could be called something as blatant as the Rapist, and yet it be treated as a joke and nobody think anything too much of it.
At this point, public tension was rife. The head of Met Police, Cressida Dick, made a public statement of Couzens being just one bad apple in the police force, which caused worldwide turmoil and eventually forced her to resign. Another detail that emerged in the wake of her murder is that there was a witness who saw Couzens talking to Everard and then arresting her, but assumed that she'd simply done something wrong, when in reality they were witnessing her kidnap. Unfortunately, nobody had any reason to suspect this arrest. Her vigil took place on the 13th of March 2021 at Clapham Common. It was organised by Reclaim These Streets, but this official vigil had been cancelled when organisers were threatened with £10,000 fines. Still, attendees gathered for an unofficial vigil, with one man heading to the bandstand, but things very quickly began to fall apart. Officers feared that the vigil had become an anti-police protest, as they were branded murderers by attendees. It took place in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic in London. This meant household mixing, aside from support bubbles and two people meeting in public outdoor places, was banned. 9 fixed penalty notices were handed out by the Met after the vigil.
Some of the most stark and shocking images to come out of the vigil were those of women being handcuffed on that bandstand on Clapham Common. Handcuffed. just a few days after it had emerged that Sarah had been falsely handcuffed by a police officer staging a fake arrest. I cannot imagine in whose world that was deemed to be appropriate. That imagery went around the world, and I'm not surprised. It was shocking. A particular image of a young red-headed woman named Patsy Stevenson, who has since become quite a vocal advocate for the ending of violence against women, was on the front page of every newspaper, as well it should have been. It was utterly appalling. And of course, a lot of those officers who were doing that handcuffing were male officers. There were certainly questions asked at the time, and there have been questions asked by police officers that I've spoken to in the months and years since about why the force at that vigil wasn't entirely female. Even at your most cynical, just purely for the optics of it, before anything had truly been able to be sorted out within the police, surely having only female officers at a vigil like that would have been the bare minimum you could do. And yet instead, you had a police force and arguably a police commissioner who completely failed to understand the mood at the time and sent male officers to that vigil and then allowed them to handcuff young women. Truly appalling and shocking. I still find it shocking to this day.
A lot can be said for how the police handled women at the vigil, as they were seen trampling on laid flowers and pinning women down to the ground.
Sarah's murder started a nationwide conversation around women's safety, and women started talking about the things we do to keep ourselves safe in a way that we never had before. All those small actions that you take and almost have become part of everyday life so that we don't even think about them. Things like walking home with your keys in your hand so that presumably if you're attacked, you have a ready weapon, wearing trainers, wearing bright colours, messaging your friends when you get home to let them know you're back safe, walking in well-lit streets, all the things that Sarah actually did right herself and yet did nothing to keep her safe. Because guess what? We're not tackling the causes of these crimes and we're not making enough effort to root out the perpetrators. And it was really interesting. In fact, it was revolutionary that women were having these conversations, I think, for the first time and recognising, well, hang on, why is the burden on us to keep ourselves safe? Why is the onus on us? It absolutely shouldn't be, and enough is enough. And that was really compounded by some of the helpful suggestions that the police made in the days and weeks after Sarah's murder, such as, well, if you're worried about your safety or if a police officer stops you and you're not sure of his credentials, don't worry, you can just wave down a bus and the driver will stop and help you, which is one of the most ridiculous things I have ever heard in terms of keeping women safe, not least because in London, if you try and wave down a bus at a bus stop, it often doesn't stop.
Wave a bus down. Now, one, there's got to be a bus. Two, they've got to stop. Three, you're going to throw yourself in front of a large object that's coming at you at some speed. Really, really silly advice. And all that did was muddy the waters about what should be done, what safety there should be.
In the days after Cousin's arrest, his phone had been seized and unlocked a disturbing WhatsApp group that included him and a few of his colleagues. This group contained vile, misogynistic and racist messages. This detail alone revealed just how many men in the police force see these things as just being laddish banter, but these messages are often one not to be joked about. Of course, this case brought a fear like no other, opening a door on how police can win back trust. Violence against women is already prominent. How can someone of your own not abide by the laws? It continued to come with heightened concern when the case of Sabina Nessa, who was killed minutes from her southeast London home in 2021, sent eerie similarities. The case of 28-year-old Sabina Nessa was one that really ignited grief and fury over violence against women. Ms. Nessa taught a Year 1 class at Rushy Green Primary School in Catford.
My sister was funny, lovable, caring. She crazy. My youngest two would say that she was crazy. She was very opinionated as well. And she had a good heart. and she loved her nieces.
And when you say crazy, what does
Outgoing, yeah, she was very outgoing. She'd just have these random outbursts and likes to tell jokes as well.
So she sounds full of fun?
Yes, she was, yes. Full of fun. I think her friends would describe her as beautiful, kind soul.
And what did she say to you about the children?
They were fun, they had their own characteristics about them, and I remember when I went to the open evening where they had that special evening for her to remember Sabina, and they said that my child really enjoyed chess, and what she did was implement a chess club for the child, and there was other children attending chess club as well.
On the night of her murder, Nessa was running late to meet a friend at a local pub and decided to cut through Cater Park in Kidbrooke. This park was one that Nessa previously raised concern about, especially after dark. It was only a 5-minute walk.
Getting that phone call saying that she's not here anymore just was like the worst case, like a bad dream. How could he do that? How could he hurt my sister? My whole world just crumbled down.
While she was walking through the park, her killer, Kochi Salamaj, struck her unconscious with a blunt instrument, thought to be a traffic triangle, before dragging her into bushes, where she was strangled and raped. This was such a savage attack that the sign broke into pieces. Her body was found by a dog walker the following evening near the Open Space Community Centre on Kidbrooke Park Road. She was found just 200 yards away from her family home.
So we have thrill seekers. They're the people that get that adrenaline rush from doing what they're doing. There's people that would be on a mission, if you like, to kind of rid themselves of the people that they potentially think are it sounds awful to say it, but the lowest forms of life. And this is why there are so many sex worker killings. Then there are the kind of like the vigilante killers. Again, a little bit like mission killers. They want to get rid of people that they just don't believe that should be there. And they will potentially go not necessarily after, say, a sex worker as an archetypal person, but somebody that they believe shouldn't be there. And then, of course, we have the power and control seekers, the people that want the ultimate power, which, in the case of a killer, is death. I have the power over whether you live, whether you die. And when it comes to killing, we have what we call the 4 L's. People will kill for 4 reasons: love, lust, loathing, and loot, as in money.
We would never thought that we'd be in this situation. Like, you would hear this on the news, but you wouldn't hear that it was happening to you. And going to my mum's, driving there was just horrific, that long journey from London to my mum's. And then having them saying that she was found dead. It's affected my sisters, it's affected my parents. You just wouldn't believe that it would happen to you.
Salamaj had no previous convictions, but had an alleged history of violence against his wife. His partner at the time was left in fear by Salamaj, who had allegedly choked her several times before he killed Nessa. Salamaj abused his wife for months, eventually separating. His partner worked and lived in the Grand Hotel in Eastbourne after their separation, and Salamaj would start to book a few stays there. Chillingly, a call was made on the 14th of September 2021, 3 days before Nessa's murder, by her colleagues at the hotel. This call was prompted by Salamaj acting strangely and refusing to pay for his stay at the 5-star hotel. But police did not investigate his bizarre behaviour although he was seen lurking around the hotel. He would begin to book a £325 room per night, only located 5 minutes from his home. Staff were uneasy, and they knew he lived close by, which raised the question, why? Hours before he murdered Sabina, Selimaj had made plans to meet his wife and booked in the hotel for the night. Reports stated that Selimaj wanted to have sex with his wife in the back of a car, but after being rejected, he began to prowl the London streets. She later appeared in court, saying that something was bothering him and he was very agitated.
When we talk about rape as a sexual crime, there's different elements to that, and one of the major ones is control. I am ultimately controlling you here by raping you, by doing something that you don't want me to do against your will because it gives me a thrill, and a sexual thrill, a personal thrill, whatever it is.
CCTV was shown to the court of Selimaj browsing the aisles at a supermarket in Pegler Square before collecting a rolling pin. He had then gone back to the car, but realised that the better weapon would be an emergency weapon. He had found a traffic triangle. He returned to the hotel after murdering Nessa, before checking out in the morning. Her death opened up a conversation on whether this case was as publicly relevant as Sarah Everard's. Nessa's family believed that because of her ethnicity, her death wasn't as largely reported.
One conversation that Sarah's case really sparked was that of missing white person syndrome. Simply the fact that a young, attractive, blonde, middle-class woman with a good job and a happy family life and a long-term partner is perhaps the sort of victim who makes the front pages of newspapers, who makes the headlines on the news. And that is sadly true, and there are hundreds, thousands of women from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, whose murders will never get the same publicity. It's difficult because I don't think we want to be dismissive. You know, Sarah's case was absolutely horrific, and it has done so much to start conversation and to start change in this country when it comes to women's safety, however slow it might be. But at the same time, you can't ignore the fact that there are the names of many, many other women that we will never hear, and whose murders are similarly horrific and yet don't make the headlines. And that's something that desperately needs to change, and a conversation we should be having.
Journalist Katrina Mapuri created a viral post on Instagram, which eventually spearheaded the mass media coverage and brought more pressure for action to tackle violence against women in London. The Mayor, Sadiq Khan, described violence against women as a national epidemic. But still, little is done to protect women. Little is done to stop those who clearly oppose threats to our lives.
And you are a mum yourself of 2 young girls. So when you look at them, what do you think?
I'm scared for their future because I feel like there's such an increase on male violence that if we don't make a change now, it will spiral out of control when they get to their teenage years or when they head into adulthood. So I'm worried for them. I'm just worried about their safety around the environment in London, around wherever they are, really.
It would be unfair to say that nothing has been done. There have been several headline-grabbing things put in place. There has been a national police lead for violence against women and girls appointed, Maggie Blythe, who I've interviewed on several occasions and I know takes this very seriously and has an action plan to make the streets safer. But at the same time, there are still too many blockers in place. There have been inquiries, there have been reports by Baroness Casey. Women have been polled by the government on their experiences of street harassment and violence. But really, at the heart of it, the police has not yet sorted itself out. We're in a place where that process is only just now starting. This is just all taking far too much time.
Selimaj had refused to come to court to be sentenced and was therefore sentenced in his absence. Head teacher Lisa Williams described the devastating impact on Ms. Nessa's school. On her class of 30 students, she said, For the rest of their lives, these young children will never be able to comprehend why someone murdered their teacher, and in the world in which they live, is not safe for them to play in the park. She was a sister, a daughter, and an aunt. She was a teacher, loved by her pupils, and a friend to many.
If this didn't happen, I feel like she would have flourished throughout her whole teaching career, and she wanted to travel, she wanted to make something of her life.
In the vigil held for Nessa shortly after her death, Jabina, her eldest sister, broke down in tears.
I just want to say thank you for everyone who came here to show the support and respect for my sister. We have lost an amazing, caring, beautiful sister who left this world far too early. She didn't reach her 29th birthday next month.
Around 200 people gathered in her memory in Pegler Square in Kidbrooke. While many people who attended were strangers to Sabina, emotions were high, and many people turned to say enough is enough. It was also organised by Reclaim These Streets, and they encouraged everyone to light a candle on their doorstep at 7 p.m. if they could not join in person. A photograph of the much-loved primary school teacher was displayed on a wooden easel, decorated with fairy lights. Later, the darkening sky was lit with the light from dozens of mobile phones, as a minute's silence was held for Ms. Nessa. Selamati's wife was seen to be weeping among the crowds gathered there in the vigil, and she had been distraught about what her ex-husband had done. A person at the vigil whom she had met by chance had said that she cried all evening until late at night when we went by the sea and threw flowers in the water. She kept saying she doesn't understand what he had against Sabina, and that it would have made more sense if he'd killed her, not Sabina. Like cousins, vicious behaviour is usually one of the many things that often is ignored to be left roaming around the streets. But as this is something that isn't instantly a cause for concern, very rarely is anything done to pinpoint a man just roads away from committing a crime.
When it comes to violence against women, there's just far too much of it, and there's not enough done about it. And what's quite pleasing, I know our current Queen is very much an advocate of domestic violence, and really good for her for that. But also I think we do need to look at wider pictures as well about why it is almost acceptable in some situations, some families, some cultures, to be so demeaning and domineering and violent against women.
Sarah Everard, Sabina Nessa, Wenjing Lin, Jatika Goyle and Benelin Burke are names which, with all the others, must never be forgotten. And it takes an entire community, male and female, to dismantle the lies, words and actions that foster a culture in which sexual assault is seen as normal.
Shockingly, the murder of Zara Alina also saw a prolific offender who had just been released from prison, being charged with her murder. On the 26th of June 2022, Zara Alina was sexually assaulted and murdered as she was walking home in Ilford, London. The murderer, Jordan McSweeney, had committed numerous other offences and should have been recalled to prison. Around 2 a.m, Alina left a bar on Ilford High Street and began walking up Cranbrook Road. At the same time, McSweeney had been thrown out of a bar for harassing staff and had subsequently approached several other women. CCTV footage tracked McSweeney's movement. 4 women all had a lucky escape, managing to get indoors shortly after noticing they were being followed. But it would be Zara Alina, yards away from her doorstep, who didn't make it behind closed doors. McSweeney stalked and violently attacked her, leaving her for dead. The sickening violence is reported to have lasted a total of 9 minutes. Local residents were alerted to the attack and a passerby discovered Zara in a critical condition at 2:44 a.m. She was seen partially naked and collapsed on a driveway and struggling to breathe, and was taken to the Royal London Hospital, where she died of her injuries. Meanwhile, McSweeney made his escape by climbing over a wall into Valentine's Park, where he had been living in a caravan and working at the fun fair. Like most women, Alina had her life stolen from them. She had just begun working at the Royal Courts of Justice 5 weeks before her death. She sent a smiling selfie to her friends on her very first day, saying she couldn't believe she was there. It was a role that brought her one step closer to her lifelong dream of becoming a lawyer.
You know, she was encouraged by all of us to pursue her dreams, and at 5 years old she said, "I want to be a lawyer." I don't know why she said, "I want to be a lawyer," but she just plucked that out. "I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a lawyer." So we said, "Okay, then you be a lawyer." And so that's what we all encouraged her. She was on that road. 35 years old, grew up in East London. We called her Zasharuni. She's an only child to my older sister. In the first year of her life, she called us all Mum. Me, my younger sister, her mother, my mother, we were all Mum to Zara. So she was everyone's daughter in our family. She was the first extrovert in our family. We're all quite introverted. And she was the first to know everyone in any neighborhood that she lived, even at 3. You went out with her and she was on a little tricycle on the roads, and you'd be walking with her and everybody would say, "Hello, Zara, hello, Zara." And it was just so surprising that all these people knew Zara. She helped the community. She's a real helper. She has strong, strong values. Zara was incredibly giving, supportive, insightful as to what people needed around her, empathic and fearless. She had the one word that would describe Zara, if I had to use one word, I would say independent. That was what she valued more than anything, her independence. Wherever Zara walked, it was home. That was home for her. Because she knew everybody. Hundreds of people that have come to our house, that have called us, that have sent us letters saying, "You don't know me, but we knew Zara. You don't know me, we knew Zara." We had so many conversations.
She was a niece who, at just 35 years old, should have had decades of happiness ahead.
I don't feel sorry for us, even though we have this huge gap in our lives, this huge hole, and our lives will never be the same. I feel sorry that she lost the rest of her life.
A report said an attempt was made to recall McSweeney to prison 2 days before the murder and suggested he should not have been released in the first place. McSweeney had been convicted 28 times for 69 earlier offences and had a history of violence and abuse. A restraining order was taken out against him in 2021. The question of how this was allowed is one that remains unanswered. The Chief Inspector of Probation said the failure to assess McSweeney was caused by a lack of probation officers. This is similar to the case of Everard, where Met Police most likely had the potential to stop Cousins from early on, and in the case of Selamaj, where his vicious behaviour could have been examined. But at this point, there are many unanswered questions. In January 2023, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced that the government would take urgent action to review how McSweeney was incorrectly assessed for medium risk.
We've made tackling violence against women and girls a priority in London. with new initiatives and investment. But I know it isn't enough. We wouldn't be here if it was. Our city and our society must change. And I'm determined to work with partners to do everything we can to lead the way.
When he was 16 years old, he'd been very violent in terms of his behaviour in prison. He'd threatened other staff, other prisoners, he'd used weapons in prison. But that information wasn't communicated to the probation officer in the community when they were writing their report. And that failure to communicate intelligence from prisons to probation was a key failing in this case.
We hear consistently that there were missed opportunities of a probation service which is overworked, overstretched. Is the system broken beyond repair?
I think that the way the probation service assesses and then manages the risks of harm that people on probation can present to the public is broken and does need fixing at the moment and needs fixing urgently.
There is a steady increasing in seriousness of these crimes over and over again, and we've seen it in so many cases now. And I just wonder how many times we're going to have to see this dreadful pattern unfold before those dots are joined.
Can the police win back trust? I think they can. I think if they have the right people in charge and seem to be in charge, I think they very much can win back an element of trust. Nobody is going to 100% trust the police 100% of the time, but a lot of us would want to trust them. There are really, really good police officers out there doing really good jobs all the time, and having our trust, I think, is important to them, but a lot of damage was done in this case.
Zara Alina should have felt free to walk home late at night. It was Jordan McSweeney who should never have been alone on this street. He had 28 past convictions for 69 separate offences, including attacking members of public while on bail and a history of violence against women.
What's your reaction knowing that Jordan McSweeney was on your streets when he really should have been in prison?
It's tragic.
The leader of Redbridge Council believes this could have happened anywhere.
I think I worry about the safety across the land. We cannot go on where the service that we rely on is just simply not fit for purpose. And we've got to get that fit for purpose, and that has to come from central government. The probation service didn't suddenly get on its knees. This is something that's been in the making, and we've seen it with the devastating impact it's had on Zara's family.
Sorry is not good enough. This can't keep happening. It can't.
Our streets are not safe. Probation work has to be tight, has to be high quality, because the risks, the stake is high. The stake is lives. Zara's life was taken, and probation have blood on their hands. We're still traumatized. It's effort to be alive. The only way that I can live now is if I do something, if I make a meaning out of that.
McSweeney's mother was a drug addict and his father was largely absent. He was taken into care, expelled from school, and began drug dealing and bare-knuckle fighting for money. He also suffered from ADHD, mixed depression and anxiety disorder, substance misuse, and a personality disorder, all of which cause him problems. It is also said that he had no real memory of events due to the amount of alcohol and illicit substances he had consumed. He missed 2 probation hearings in the days after he was let out of prison, which was a breach of his licence. But the police had not been able to find McSweeney when they went to arrest him on June the 25th, just 24 hours before the tragic murder. He is seen on CCTV, crossing the road where he walks close to the windows of a bus and almost gets hit by a car who steers away from him. It was clear just what state of mind he was in. Witnesses saw him following a woman just moments later, but decided not to intervene. Another woman feared for her life and went inside a local shop, and McSweeney began searching the aisles but couldn't find her. He waited outside, and after some time when the woman left, McSweeney was just behind her. Cameras catch her running down the road later, with McSweeney following. He was later imprisoned for life. These streets were not alleyways, which raised the question, if we can't be safe here, where can we be safe?
I think what's also often taken far too lightly is the actual personal impact that crimes like this have on women. It is deeply, deeply affecting. Every single day, it's upsetting, it's traumatizing, it can take years to recover from. It deeply affects women's lives.
Tomorrow, Zara's family and friends will gather here for a vigil. Together, they'll silently follow the route that she took. For them, it will symbolise bringing her home where she belonged.
Alina's vigil was a silent gathering. It was held to try and bring comfort to her bereaved loved ones, while highlighting the epidemic of male violence against women and girls. Thousands of people turned up to the vigil, and people echoed comments calling for change and action to prevent more women being killed on London streets. It was held a week on from her death in the afternoon at 14:17, which was the time in the morning on the 26th of June when Alina was attacked. Alina's family requested that the attendees wear white and remain silent as we walk Zara home in our hearts. They led the crowd as it began tracing the route she would have taken. Many of those taking part in the walk held flowers and pictures of Alina and wore T-shirts with her image.
My mum lives in the area. We are from the area, you know, this is our home, this is our community. She was someone that we used to see all the time, walking past our house. She was in the same school as my sister. You know, she was just a local girl, and I feel like if this could happen to her, this could happen to anybody.
Where is the conversation to stop this from happening? Where is the prevention? Rest in power, Zara, rest in power. We're going to walk you home, my love. We're going to walk you home.
We cannot let these cases drop out of the headlines. It's imperative we keep the pressure on the police, the pressure on the government, and that we give these women the recognition they deserve, that we don't let their names just fade away, because that way we will never solve anything. So I personally feel much more driven to keep reporting on women's murders, to keep reporting on our safety.
These lives were all lives waiting to be lived. They were cut far too short due to the actions of one fearless man. Whilst these women have made headlines, it's important to note that many more never do. Families around the world have a life sentence of a permanent, unimaginable loss.
One thing that always really stays with me is something that her sister said. She spoke about Sarah's washing still hanging up, waiting to be put away, and of parcels by the front door waiting to be taken to the post office. And that's something that's really stuck with me, because we all have that. We all have washing hanging up in our homes, we all have shopping packages waiting to be returned. And the thought that you might not get to do those everyday tasks because your life has just been cruelly and meaninglessly ended is just really, really horrific, and I'm sure is something that must stay with her loved ones to this day.
Something must be done to protect women. Women should not have to change their behaviour and should be able to go about their business feeling safe any time of day or night. Officers cannot be in all places at all times, and they really should be the last resort rather than the first.
And we live in a world where still too often women aren't believed. That's the hard fact. And sadly, I think we too often just don't believe in ourselves. We don't have the confidence that an incident of harassment or stalking or sexual assault has happened to us. And that is indicative of a wider culture in society, in policing, in politics, that tells us that our safety isn't serious, that it doesn't deserve to be treated with seriousness. And that is the deep root of this problem that really will take years, I think, to unpick.
In the case of Everard, Nessa and Alina, vicious behaviour needs to be looked at much earlier and thoroughly examined. The warning signs were there, but they were ignored. Women shouldn't feel as though they wouldn't be believed, and workforces need to encourage both men and women to speak out against violence, even if it is just the tiniest hint. These tiny hints are usually ones that end up leading to something massive and can even save a life.